My name is Sarah. This is hard to talk about. It's been 6 months since I left that place, but I still check. I still listen. My friends, my family, they think I had a breakdown, a product of stress, of living alone for the first time. They don't understand. They can't. They weren't there. They didn't hear it. But you, maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you'll understand why I can't sleep in the dark anymore. Why the silence is the most terrifying sound in the world. It all started with the apartment 4B, my first real place after college. It was in one of those old pre-war brick buildings with more character than structural integrity. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned, and the windows rattled when the wind blew. But it was all mine. It was a testament to my newfound independence, a little kingdom of thrift store furniture and unpacked boxes in the heart of a city that felt both exciting and overwhelmingly lonely. I remember the day I got the keys. The landlord, a heavy-set man named Mr. Henderson with a wheezy laugh and sweat stains on his shirt, gave me the tour. It was a quick one. He pointed out the charming, read ancient, kitchen appliances and the cozy, read tiny, bedroom. As we were finishing up in the small hallway that connected the living room to the bedroom, he gestured vaguely at a yellowed plastic box on the wall. "That's the old intercom system," he wheezed. "Hasn't worked in 20 years. Most tenants just paint over it. Don't worry about it." I looked at it. It was an ugly thing. The plastic had aged to the color of old teeth. It had a row of buttons with the apartment numbers worn off, a grill for the speaker, and a single red button labeled Talk. It looked like a fossil from another era, a piece of the building's history that time forgot to erase. I was an artist, a painter. A part of me appreciated its vintage, ugly aesthetic. I made a mental note to leave it as it was. It added character. I had no idea what I was really inviting into my life. The first few weeks were a honeymoon. I loved the freedom. I loved the creaks and groans of the old building, the sounds of life around me. I'd stay up late painting, the canvas propped up in my living room, music playing softly, the city lights painting patterns on my walls. I felt safe. I felt like I was finally starting my real life. The first time it happened, I almost missed it. It was late, around 2 in the morning. I was cleaning my brushes, the apartment silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. And then I heard it. A short, sharp burst of static. Kshht. It came from the direction of the hallway. I stopped what I was doing, listening. The silence rushed back in. I shrugged it off. Old wiring, probably. The building was full of it. I finished cleaning up and went to bed, the sound completely forgotten. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, it was longer. A rolling wave of static that lasted for about 5 seconds. Kshht. But this time, underneath the static, I thought I heard something else. A voice, faint and muffled, like listening to a radio from another room. I couldn't make out any words. I got up and walked into the hallway, staring at the old intercom box. It was silent, inert. I pressed the talk button. Nothing. I tapped the speaker grill. Nothing. My heart was beating a little faster. It was creepy, sure, but it had to be a technical glitch. Maybe it was picking up a stray radio frequency or a trucker CB radio. I tried to find a logical explanation because the alternative was something I didn't want to consider. I tried to put it out of my mind. I was busy with my new job at a local art gallery, trying to make friends, trying to build a life. But the incidents continued, always late at night, always when I was alone. The static became a regular occurrence, and the voices within the static started to get clearer. One night, I heard a woman humming a lullaby. It was a simple, sweet tune, but the intercom warped it into something haunting and sad. The sound was tinny and distant, filled with a profound sorrow that seeped into the room. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I sat on my bed, frozen, until it faded away. Another night, I heard a man and a woman arguing. Their words were still indistinct, a muffled torrent of anger and fear, but the emotion was crystal clear. It was raw and desperate. I felt like a voyeur, an unwilling audience to some long-forgotten domestic tragedy. I started to dread the nighttime. The silence of my apartment was no longer comforting. It was expectant. It was the pause before the performance. I began to feel a change in the apartment itself. A cold spot developed in the hallway, right under the intercom. Even on warm days, the air there was frigid. Sometimes I'd walk into the living room and feel like I had just missed someone walking out. The feeling of being watched became a constant companion. I was sleep-deprived and on edge. My boss at the gallery, a kind woman named Maria, asked if I was okay. I told her I was just having trouble adjusting to the new place. How could I tell her I thought my apartment was haunted by a broken intercom? The real turning point, the moment that shattered all my attempts at rationalization, happened about a month after I moved in. I was having a particularly bad day. A project at work had gone wrong. I felt a sharp pang of homesickness, and the loneliness of the city felt like a physical weight. I came home and just sat on my couch and cried. I wasn't sobbing loudly, just quiet, tired tears of frustration. I cried for maybe 10 minutes, and when I finally stopped, sniffing and wiping my eyes, the apartment was silent. And then the intercom crackled to life. There was no static this time, just a single clear sound, the sound of a woman crying. A perfect mimicry of the way I had just been crying. It was my sadness, my frustration played back at me through that ugly plastic box. It was listening. I scrambled back on the couch, my heart hammering against my ribs. The crying continued for a few seconds, then stopped. It was replaced by a whisper, a woman's voice full of a strange, cold comfort. Woman's whisper from intercom. "Shh, it's okay. No one can hurt you in here." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just listening. It wasn't just mimicking. It was responding. I stared at the intercom, my mind reeling. Who was that? What did it mean, in here? From that point on, things escalated. The broadcasts were no longer just echoes of the past. They felt targeted. They felt intelligent. If I was watching a comedy on TV, I might hear a faint, joyless laugh from the intercom after the show was over. If I was on the phone with my mom and told her I was doing great, I'd later hear a mocking whisper from the hallway. Great. It was a campaign of psychological warfare. It was isolating me, making me question my own perceptions. I stopped having friends over. I was too afraid they would hear it, or worse, that they wouldn't, and I would finally have to accept that I was going insane. My world shrank to the four walls of that apartment. My art suffered. My canvases sat blank. How could I create beauty when I was surrounded by such an ugly, creeping dread? I started talking to it, not out loud at first, just in my head. Who are you? What do you want? One night, feeling a surge of desperate bravery, I decided to confront it. I stood in the cold spot in the hallway, my arms wrapped around myself. "Who's there?" I said, my voice trembling. The intercom was silent. I almost laughed at myself. Of course it wouldn't answer. It was just a broken piece of plastic. I turned to walk away, and it spoke. Its voice was different this time. It wasn't a man or a woman. It was a child, a little girl. Her voice was small and clear. Little girl's voice from intercom. "I'm Lily." I froze, my hand on the living room doorframe. I couldn't breathe. It had a name. "Lily?" I whispered back. "What do you want?" There was a long pause. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I thought maybe I had imagined it. Then she spoke again. Her voice was no longer just a voice. It was filled with a chilling, desperate plea. Little girl's voice from intercom. "I can't find my mommy. It's so dark. Can you Can you help me open the door? My mind raced. What door? There was no one in the building named Lily. I would have seen her. I would have heard her. I don't understand, I stammered. The intercom crackled. The little girl's voice was gone. In its place was the woman's voice from before, the one that had tried to comfort me. But this time, it wasn't comforting. It was cold. It was menacing. Woman's whisper, "You're not supposed to talk to her. You're just supposed to listen." And with that, the intercom went dead. I stood there for what felt like an hour, shaking uncontrollably. A cold dread washed over me, a dread deeper than any I had ever felt. This wasn't a ghost story. This wasn't a haunting. This was a set of rules, and I had just broken one. I had the horrifying realization that I wasn't the one living in apartment 4B. I was just the latest exhibit in a zoo, and the thing behind the plastic grill was the zookeeper. The week after I spoke to Lily, the apartment changed. The subtle, creepy vibe it had before was gone, replaced by an active, malevolent presence. The cold spot in the hallway seemed to spread, seeping into the living room. Doors would creak open on their own. I'd come home from work to find a kitchen cabinet wide open, or a book knocked off a shelf. They were small things, easily deniable, but they were happening every day. It was a constant, low-level torment designed to fray my nerves. The intercom's broadcasts became more aggressive. The sad echoes of the past were replaced with sounds of terror. I'd be woken up in the middle of the night by a blood-curdling scream that would last for a few seconds and then vanish, leaving me in the ringing silence with my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. One time, I heard a sound like fingernails scratching desperately against a wooden door, a sound that went on and on for almost an hour. I was living in a state of perpetual fear. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. At work, Maria would look at me with such pity and concern. I think she suspected I was on drugs or in an abusive relationship. The truth felt so much crazier. I knew I had to do something. Moving out was the obvious answer, but a part of me felt trapped. The whispers had become a part of my life, a dark secret that I was perversely curious about. Who was Lily? Who was her mother? What happened in this apartment? The artist in me, the storyteller, needed to know the ending. It was a foolish, dangerous curiosity, but it felt like the only way to reclaim any sense of control. My investigation started with Mr. Henderson, the landlord. I caught him on his way out of the building one afternoon. "Mr. Henderson," I said, trying to sound casual, "I was just curious about the history of my apartment. Who lived there before me?" He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Why do you ask? Everything okay with the apartment?" "Oh yeah, everything's great. I'm just a history buff. Love old buildings." He seemed to relax. "Ah, well, before you, it was a young couple, students. They were only here a year. Before them, let me think. An old fella died of a heart attack. And before him," he trailed off, a thoughtful look on his face. "Before him was the sad one, the Hayes family, a long time ago. Back in the 90s. "The Hayes family?" I prompted, my heart starting to pound. "Yeah, Eleanor and her little girl. Husband left her right after the baby was born. Poor woman. She wasn't right in the head, especially after. The baby." He stopped, looking uncomfortable. "Anyway, they moved out suddenly one day, just packed up and left. It was a real shame. The little girl was a sweet thing, quiet. He wouldn't say any more, and I knew pushing him would only make him suspicious. But I had a name, Eleanor Hayes, and she had a daughter, a quiet little girl. Could her name have been Lily?" That night, I went to the local library. Armed with a name and a rough time frame, I spent hours scrolling through microfilm archives of the local newspaper. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I was relentless. And then I found it. It wasn't a headline. It was a small article buried deep in the back pages of a paper from the winter of 1996. The headline read, "Mother Questioned in Disappearance of Child." I read the article with a growing sense of horror. Eleanor Hayes had been brought in for questioning after her 2-year-old daughter, Lillian Hayes, Lily, had been reported missing. Eleanor's neighbors had called the police after not seeing the little girl for several days. According to the article, Eleanor was incoherent and emotionally unstable. She told the police that Lily was gone, that she'd been taken. She claimed to hear voices in the apartment, voices that came from the walls. She said a man whispered to her at night, telling her that her daughter wasn't safe. There was never enough evidence to charge her. Lily's body was never found. Eleanor was eventually committed to a psychiatric hospital, and the case went cold. She had lived in apartment 4B, my apartment. I printed the article, my hands shaking. The woman's voice from the intercom, the one that tried to comfort me, the one that told me not to talk to Lily, it had to be Eleanor. And Lily was the little girl who had vanished. She hadn't been taken. I knew with a sickening certainty what had happened. Lily never left the apartment. The article mentioned a detail that made my stomach churn. During their search of the apartment, police noted that the door to the bedroom closet had been barricaded from the outside with a heavy dresser. Eleanor had claimed she was trying to keep the whispering man from getting to her daughter. "Can you help me open the door?" Lily's words echoed in my head. I went back to my apartment, the newspaper article clutched in my hand. It was late and the building was quiet. I walked into my bedroom and stared at the closet. It was just a normal closet with a simple wooden door. It was where I kept my clothes, my shoes. But now it looked like a tomb. Driven by a terrible compulsion, I emptied the closet, pulling out all my clothes and boxes until it was completely bare. Then I ran my hands along the back wall. It was covered in old, faded wallpaper. But as I felt along the bottom, my fingers brushed against something. A loose edge. My heart hammering, I carefully peeled the wallpaper back. Underneath, the plaster was darker, newer looking than the rest of the wall. And carved into the plaster, with what looked like a fingernail, were words. A child's desperate scribbles. "Mommy, why? So dark. Let me out. The man is here." I fell back, gasping, a scream caught in my throat. This was it. This was the door Lily wanted me to open. She wasn't behind it. She was in it. She was part of the walls, part of the building's memory. That night, the intercom was more active than ever. It was a cacophony of terror. I heard Lily crying, her little voice calling for her mommy. I heard Eleanor sobbing, muttering about the whispering man. And for the first time, I heard a new voice, a man's voice. It was deep and guttural, a low chuckle that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It was the voice of pure evil. I decided I had to get out. My morbid curiosity had been satisfied, replaced by a primal need to survive. I started packing my things in a frantic haze, throwing clothes and books into boxes. I would break the lease. I would pay whatever it cost. I just had to leave. As I was packing, I tried to record the sounds from the intercom on my phone. I needed proof. I needed someone to believe me. I held my phone up to the speaker grill as Lily's cries filled the hallway. When I played the recording back, my blood ran cold. I couldn't hear Lily. I couldn't hear the intercom. All the recording had captured was the sound of my own ragged breathing. And then a clear, distinct whisper right next to the phone's microphone. Man's whisper on recording. "No one needs to know our secrets, Sarah." The entity wasn't just in the intercom. It was aware of me, of my attempts to document it. It could manipulate technology.
The realization hit me like a physical blow. How could I escape something that could follow me through a phone? I was standing in my half-packed living room, paralyzed by fear, when the front door's deadbolt lock, a heavy, solid piece of metal I had installed myself, slid shut with a loud, definitive clank. I rushed to the door, my heart seizing in my chest. I twisted the lock. It wouldn't budge. It was jammed, as if held by an invisible hand. I was trapped. The lights in the apartment flickered and then went out, plunging me into darkness. And from the hallway, the intercom crackled to life. It wasn't Lily's voice, or Eleanor's, or the man's. It was my voice.
Oh, yeah, everything's great. I love the new place. It was playing back my lie to Mr. Henderson, mocking me. A cold, robotic laugh echoed from the speaker, a sound that wasn't human. And then the deep, guttural voice of the man returned, no longer a whisper, but a resonant, commanding presence in the dark. The performance is not over. You will stay for the end. You're part of the story now. Part 3. The Listener's Choice. Trapped. The word echoed in the crushing darkness of the apartment. The deadbolt was solid. The windows were painted shut years ago, and I was on the 4th floor. My phone had no signal. Every attempt to call out resulted in a burst of harsh static, followed by that low, chuckling laugh from the intercom. It had cut me off from the world. I was its prisoner. For the first few hours, I was a wreck. I pounded on the door, screaming for help until my throat was raw and my fists were bruised. The only response was the mocking echo of my own voice from the intercom. My pleas for help played back at me in a distorted loop. The entity was feeding on my terror, growing stronger with every tear, every scream. Eventually, exhaustion won. I slumped to the floor in the living room, my back against the locked door, and a strange, cold calm washed over me. It was the calm of utter hopelessness. Crying and screaming were what it wanted. Panic was its fuel. I had to stop feeding it. I sat in the darkness, forcing myself to breathe, to think. I was an artist. I observed. I looked for patterns. What was this thing? Was it a ghost? A demon? It was intelligent. It was predatory. It fed on emotion. Eleanor Hayes had been its last meal, and it had starved for 20 years until I moved in. It didn't haunt the apartment. The apartment was its hunting ground. The intercom wasn't the source. It was just its mouth. As I sat there in the dark, my mind racing, I began to notice a pattern in the broadcasts. It wasn't just random sounds anymore. It was telling a story. Its story. I heard Eleanor's descent into madness, her fearful whispers about the man in the walls growing into frantic, paranoid ramblings. I heard her singing lullabies to Lily, her voice cracking with strain. I heard her arguing with someone, the baby's father maybe, his voice full of anger and frustration. And woven through it all was the man's voice, the entity. At first, it was just a whisper to Eleanor, planting seeds of doubt and fear. He'll leave you. You can't protect her. She's better off somewhere quiet. Then, as her mental state deteriorated, its voice became clearer, more commanding. It was grooming her, isolating her, just as it had been doing to me. The final piece of the story was the most horrible. I heard the sounds of that last night. Eleanor sobbing uncontrollably. Lily crying in confusion. I heard the sound of the heavy dresser being scraped across the floor, barricading the closet door. And then I heard Eleanor's voice, a chilling, hollow monotone. "You'll be safe in here, baby. So quiet in here. The man can't get you.
He promised. He promised he'd be quiet now. She hadn't been trying to protect Lily from the entity. The entity had convinced her to make a sacrifice, to give it Lily in exchange for silence, in exchange for peace. The broadcast ended with the sound of Lily's small fists beating against the inside of the closet door, and then a long, drawn-out silence. The silence of a predator after its meal. Hearing it all laid out like that, I finally understood. This thing couldn't be reasoned with. It couldn't be exorcised. It was a parasite woven into the fabric of the building. My fear was its food, and my sanity was its prize. If I stayed, I would end up like Eleanor, a madwoman in a silent room, my own story absorbed into its collection of whispers. But what if I didn't give it what it wanted? What if I refused to be a character in its horror story?
I stood up, a new resolve hardening inside me. I was done being scared. I walked into the kitchen, fumbled through a drawer, and found what I was looking for, a hammer. I then went to my art supplies and pulled out a can of turpentine and a lighter. I walked into the hallway and stood before the yellowed plastic box. The air was ice cold. "I'm not her," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not afraid of you." The intercom crackled. The man's voice boomed, shaking the walls. Man's voice from intercom. "I have seen every corner of your soul, Sarah. You are drowning in fear." "No," I said, raising the hammer. "You're just a story, and every story has an end." I swung the hammer with all my might. It connected with the plastic casing, which shattered with a loud crack. Wires and old circuit boards spilled out like guts. The apartment erupted. The lights flickered violently. A deafening roar, a sound of pure rage and agony blasted from the broken speaker. The walls themselves seemed to groan, and a wave of psychic pressure pushed against me, trying to bring me to my knees. The whispers of every soul this thing had ever tormented swirled around me, a hurricane of pain and sorrow. I ignored it. I poured the turpentine over the exposed wiring. The roar intensified. I could feel its hatred, its shock. No one had ever fought back before. I flicked the lighter. The flame sparked to life, a tiny point of defiance in the oppressive darkness. I tossed it onto the turpentine-soaked wires. Whoosh! The intercom burst into flames. The fire was unnaturally bright, casting frantic dancing shadows on the walls. The roar from the speaker changed, morphing into a high-pitched, agonizing shriek as the plastic melted and the wires burned. And then, with a final violent pop, the front door's deadbolt snapped open. The shrieking stopped. The fire on the wall died down as quickly as it had started, leaving a blackened, melted scar. Silence. A true, empty silence. The cold spot was gone. The feeling of being watched was gone. It was over. I had won. I stumbled out of the apartment, not even bothering to grab my things. I ran down the 4 flights of stairs and burst out into the pre-dawn glow of the city. The cool air on my face felt like a miracle. I didn't stop running for 10 blocks. That was 6 months ago. I never went back. I left everything behind. My art, my furniture, my clothes. I moved to a different city, to a brand new apartment complex where the paint still smells fresh. I have a new job, new friends. I'm trying to rebuild my life. My therapist says I have PTSD. She says I created a complex delusion to cope with the stress of living alone. My family nods and agrees. It's easier for them to believe I'm crazy than to believe that something malevolent lurks in the wiring of an old building. I let them believe it. It's easier that way. But I know what happened, and I know it's not over. I destroyed its mouth, but I didn't destroy it. I just made it angry. I just taught it a new lesson. And that's why I'm telling you this story, because I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to understand why I still check my locks 3 times before I go to bed.
why I cover every reflective surface in my apartment after dark, and why, sometimes when I'm on my phone, I hear it, just for a second, buried deep under the voice of the person I'm talking to, a faint, familiar crackle of static, a whisper that's getting stronger every day. It learned from Eleanor. It learned from me. It learned that its old ways were too slow, too stationary. It learned that in this modern world, there are wires and signals everywhere. It doesn't need a box on a wall anymore. It just needs a listener. So, the next time you're on a late-night call and you hear a little bit of static on the line, the next time your phone glitches for just a second, ask yourself, is it just bad reception, or is something else trying to join the conversation? Is it just a story, or has it learned your name too?